Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Nick Blumberg. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. Here's what we're looking at.
They took 98%, copied and pasted, but took out key components.
Competing plans to reform renters' rights work their way through City Council. We hear from supporters of both proposals.
We deserve a city government who remembers who it works for.
And entrepreneur Liam Stanton joins us to talk about his campaign for Chicago mayor. First off tonight, two candidates hoping to succeed Congressman Chuy Garcia didn't gather enough signatures to qualify for the ballot. Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez and former Latino Victory Project Executive Director Myra Macias launched independent bids for the 4th Congressional District seat after Garcia's last-minute announcement that he wouldn't run again cleared a path for his chief of staff to secure the Democratic nomination. But earlier today, the State Board of Elections voted unanimously that Macias came up more than 1,000 signatures short and Sigcho Lopez was short more than 1,200 signatures. Both would-be candidates slammed the decision as harmful to the democratic process. If they want to challenge the election board's decision, they can do so in Cook County Circuit Court. State officials and advocates for people with autism are celebrating a new program aimed at making traffic stops safer. The Blue Envelope program is a statewide initiative recently signed into law and aims to ease communication between law enforcement and drivers on the autism spectrum. It provides a blue envelope to hold a driver's license, registration, and insurance information and alerts officers that the driver may have different communication needs. The envelope also has a space for an emergency contact and guidance on how best to interact with the driver. Advocates say it's rooted in a basic idea.
What if something as simple as a blue envelope could create a pause? A pause that prevents misunderstanding, a pause that replaces fear with understanding, a pause that can change an interaction, maybe even save a life.
The free envelopes will be available at DMVs and other locations statewide starting January 1st. The Shedd Aquarium sounds a note of cautious optimism after 4 rescued beluga whales arrived safely in Chicago. The female belugas are among 30 whales rescued from a defunct Canadian water park that closed to the public in 2024. The park had threatened to euthanize the whales when Canadian authorities blocked their transfer to China. In addition to the Shedd, other facilities in Georgia, Texas, California, and Spain offered to rehome the whales. Shedd officials say they'll be keeping a close eye on the new belugas, ensuring they begin to eat, socialize, and explore their new habitat. The Shedd has committed to taking as many as 10 of the shuttered water park's belugas. We've got much more about this story on our website. Up next, what to know about 2 proposed renters ordinances. We hear from both camps right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
More than half of Chicago households rent, and the long-standing debate over how the city should protect those residents is in the spotlight once again. 2 amendments to the city's 40-year-old ordinance that covers landlord and tenant responsibilities are under consideration in City Council. In June, Mayor Brandon Johnson introduced the Protecting Renters Ordinance, or PRO. Then last week, a group of aldermen countered with the Fair and Accountable Illinois Renters Ordinance, or FAIR. Both propose many of the same changes, but a few key differences are emerging as sticking points. Joining us to talk about the proposals are Lizette Castaneda, Commissioner of Chicago's Department of Housing, Jonah Karsh, organizer with the Metropolitan Tenants Organization, Michael Glasser, president of the Neighborhood Building Owners Alliance, and Gilbert Villegas, 36th Ward Alderman and City Council's Zoning Committee Chair. He represents parts of the Northwest Side, including Belmont, Cragen, Hermosa, and Humboldt Park. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you for having us.
So there's been a lot of conversation about, what went into these ordinances, some of the folks backing them. Commissioner Castaneda, if I can begin with you, who were the stakeholders that you worked with while drafting PRO?
Yeah, absolutely. For the last couple of years, the Department of Housing has been running the Advisory Committee on Renting Rights. site, and that has allowed us to have an opportunity to talk to both landlord stakeholders and housing justice advocates. We've had folks like the Chicagoland Apartment Association, we've had folks like the Metropolitan Tenants Organization, and we've gotten feedback from the Chicago Realtors. Much of what was put into the ordinance does actually reflect feedback from both camps.
Alderman Villegas, what were the stakeholders you worked with while putting together FAIR?
Yeah, so our colleagues, as well as on the ground talking to landlords as well as renters to explain to them what PRO could potentially do. And there were some concerns, and that's why we worked collectively as council members to figure out what we can do to put forward an ordinance that I think forces compromise. As you stated before, there are things that we agree with and some things that we don't agree with. I mean, the administration has reached out to me and said, hey, we like some of the things that you have in your ordinance that is not in ours. So the question is, how do we figure out a way to continue dialogue so that way potentially there could be some type of compromise?
Jonah Karsh, I know one of the key pieces of PRO is this idea of just cause eviction requirements. For folks who aren't familiar, can you tell us about what those are and why your organization is advocating for them?
Sure. So right now in the city of Chicago, a landlord has the right to not renew a tenant's lease for any reason or no reason at all. Unfortunately, we see this used to disguise retaliation frequently. We also see it as a tool of gentrifiers who want to come into neighborhoods, and we have worked with buildings that were completely emptied. People were given just 120 days to leave. What the just cause requirements do is say that if a tenant is being displaced for a reason that isn't their fault, not for any of the reasons on the screen, that they would be entitled to relocation assistance from the landlord. We think it's a vital measure that's necessary in order to protect tenants.
And to be clear, that relocation assistance, that's monetary assistance?
Yes, it's monetary assistance that is designed to help cover the cost of a tenant's move in the event that they're being terminated their lease for no fault of their own. One thing I do want to say in regards to what's on the screen, it is not true that if a tenant refuses to sign a lease with a rent increase, that they would be entitled to relocation assistance. That is only the case if the rent increase was offered, quote, with the intention of encouraging the tenant not to renew. So this is just trying to prevent bad behavior. It is not the intention of the Protecting Renters Coalition to prevent landlords from increasing rent.
Michael Glasser, you know, as a building owner and as someone who works with other owners, what's your reaction to these proposed requirements around a just cause eviction?
It's terrible. It absolutely, first of all, it's a lot of talk about affordability, adding more burdens on housing providers, making it more burdensome for us to run our buildings only increases the cost of housing. And it goes the opposite direction of the goal that so many of us share of making housing more affordable. This notion of just cause eviction, it's not a good name. I prefer to call it an endless lease. And the problem with that is that a housing provider, we call ourselves housing providers, not landlords, we are very diligent in putting folks in our building that will be good tenants. And if we know that a certain tenant has an endless lease and an entitlement to automatically renew their lease, we're going to be so careful in who we put in that building that many folks that have blemishes on their credit reports or have a criminal background problem, bankruptcy, we're not going to rent to them out of fear that we're going to be with them for forever. And so for many reasons, it really deprives the owner of the ability to operate their building, and it's also a disservice to tenants who might feel that other tenants are harassing them or are noisy. And the only recourse that a landlord would have or housing provider would have would be eviction, which will only add to the number of evictions out there and make it, and evictions for breach of contract are very tough to prove.
Commissioner Castaneda, I know PRO also contains a tenant's bill of rights. What does that involve, and what would enforcement look like for those rights?
Yeah, ultimately what we would want to be able to do through PRO is to build out the Bureau of Rental Housing Services. This will be a service both for tenants and for landlords. In fact, it would be one of the biggest expansions of services to landlords. And what that will mean for things like the tenant bill of rights is that it will be a place where you can come to adjudicate any issues that might occur between a landlord and a tenant when they're trying to have have things like peaceful enjoyment of their home. The other thing that the Tenant Bill of Rights will do is that it will codify services and protections for gender-based violence survivors to ensure that they have recourse in the instances where they have faced that violence in their own homes.
Alderman Villegas, on the fair side, it keeps enforcement with the Department of Buildings rather than creating that new entity the commissioner just discussed. Why do you think that's the right approach?
Listen, we're talking about, we have a budget deficit here. We have a budget deficit here in the city of Chicago. And so we're trying to figure out how to minimize costs, how to streamline processes. And so the fact that the Department of Buildings has staff that's in place, and the Department of Housing has some staff, there's an opportunity there to take a look at using that current staff in order to put forward services that will ultimately help the people of Chicago. So we're concerned about adding more additional costs to the budget, additional pension liability. I think there's ways that we can do with our current staff.
Commissioner, is there a significant cost here?
So everything from PRO would be covered from within the fees of the rental registry, which are tiered to ensure that the smallest impact goes to the smallest landlords and the largest impact goes to the biggest landlords. We have a 3-year implementation plan, and that ramp up does include existing staff from the Department of Buildings and the Department of Housing, and then anyone else that would be hired. This is a revenue neutral ordinance, so it would be all from within that same pot of money.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
And ultimately, it would mean that the Bureau would be there to serve, again, both landlords and tenants, services like having things like model leases and other things that landlords have not had access to before.
Yeah, I know the rental registry also comes with the registry fee, but just in terms of having that registry of available units, Jonah Karsh, what would that mean for tenants?
Yeah, it's a great transparency measure. So one of the things that I really appreciate about the Protecting Renters Ordinance is the amount of data that it would allow the city to collect. One of the reasons that we struggle to figure out, for example, how many small landlords we have in our city is that we just don't know because we don't keep the data. The rental registry that's proposed in the Protecting Renters Ordinance would include detailed information, and landlords would pay a fee to register, but not the smallest landlords who would be exempt. Those other landlords would pay no more than $5 a month per unit, and that money would go towards both the administration of the registry and a Bureau of Rental Housing Services to aid proactive enforcement and education of rights. One of the biggest gaps that I see in my organization, which assists tenants across the city, responds to thousands of calls a year on a hotline, is that the landlord might be breaking the law, but if your only recourse is to take them to court and sue, and the city's not getting involved, it's really hard to have justice for tenants that are being wronged in real time. I think the Bureau solves that. I'm concerned that Alderman Villegas' ordinance does not include a funding mechanism for the registry.
Well, so yeah, the reason why it doesn't include a rental registry is because we've been in discussions based on the ordinance that we propose, that there's technology out there that currently being used in different cities and states that the tenants, the owners themselves don't have to. So you have registries for foreclosure. They also do registries for rental, and what they do is they work with the banks in order to pay for those costs, but they also work with the housing providers as well. But it doesn't create a whole new bureau. And it also allows for the technology to continue to be up to speed. Because what we see, the proposal that was put forward by the new bureau is that it includes the Department of Technology and Innovation, creating a whole new platform here. And so there's off-the-shelf technology that already exists that we can work with, that's proven technology that will get it up and running quicker, and we don't have to be in charge of it. So we have a tenant, we have someone that's actually working with us that will be able to provide this information on a monthly basis, real time.
Another issue that I want to get to, both plans put limits on security deposits. PRO goes further to ban certain, move-in fees. Michael Glasser, what's your reaction to that proposal?
We've surveyed tenants and learned that it's about an even mix between tenants provided an option between a refundable security deposit of maybe a month and a half rent versus a move-in fee, which might be 30 to 50% of a month's rent, which is non-refundable. Tenants are split on that. Oftentimes, tenants who are more challenged to come up with the money to get an apartment would prefer to pay the move-in fee of, say, $350 or $400 to get the apartment rather than come up with a month and a half rent for a security deposit. So we believe that there should be choices, and the folks that are best able to make those choices come through the marketplace, the tenant, and the housing provider to make that choice between them. And those folks are more than capable and have been more than capable, and not be unduly restricted by laws that really just make life a lot more complicated for everyone.
Before we run out of time, Alderman Villegas, you wrote earlier today on Facebook, there are some negotiations already underway, but you were, calling out the mayor for, attacking supporters of FAIR rather than coming to the table. What do you hope to see out of negotiations going forward?
Again, when we introduced this FAIR ordinance, within 2 days we had the administration reach out to us and talk about, hey, there's some things in there that we can support. We see that there's a lot of similar language. How do we work together? That's great. However, when you start going out public and you start criticizing the alderman for putting forward a proposal that is very similar, but it's just not 100%, this just reminds me of Budget 2.0, where the mayor was able to get most of what he wanted, but we had some disagreements on certain things. Listen, the way that pro's written right now, we feel that ultimately is going to end up costing renters. So we're concerned about that.
We've got about a minute left, but Commissioner Castaneda, what are you looking for in terms of negotiations moving forward?
I think that the alderman's right that there are some points where we can agree on. We all want to see that there is more production, that vacant land is brought back into productive use, that vacant properties are back into productive use. And ultimately, we want to meet this moment. We know that this is the first substantive update to the residential landlord tenant ordinance in 40 years. We know that it's important that we lead the way in ensuring that renters are protected, because we cannot have a housing for all vision that does not include renters.
So I wanted to add, as the zoning chair, we're going to build in order to deal with the supply issue, which is actually squeezing renters.
All right. I'm sure this conversation will continue in the weeks and months ahead, but that's all the time we have for right now. Commissioner Lizette Castaneda, Jonah Karsh, Michael Glasser, and Alderman Gilbert Villegas, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
And up next, mayoral candidate Liam Stanton on his bid for Chicago's highest office. Candidates hoping to get on the ballot for Chicago's mayoral election can begin circulating petitions next week. While the election is still more than 6 months away, a number of candidates have already announced their campaigns. Entrepreneur Liam Stanton is one of them, and he says Chicago is ready for a different perspective. The Rogers Park Natives Hit the Gas platform prioritizes making the city more affordable, safe, and small business friendly. And Liam Stanton joins us now to talk about his campaigns. Frank, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you're coming at this, not from a background as a politician, much like the last couple folks elected mayor of Chicago. What do you see as your qualifications for leading the city?
Yeah, I think I grew up in Rogers Park. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I'm the youngest of 8 from a huge Chicago family. I'm from a long line of public servants. So my grandfather came here as an immigrant and cleaned streetcars. My dad served as a Chicago police officer. So I kind of have that rooted in the neighborhood values thing, which I think is key for this next mayor to have that perspective. And I think I bring some interesting experience that comes from outside of politics. I've started and run small businesses. I've run large global organizations. And I think that mixture of being rooted in our neighborhoods and having sort of the sense of urgency and creativity and executive management to run large businesses and organizations is really key for the city right now.
So, among the items on your platform, you support term limits for alder people, reducing the size of city council. How do you plan to convince alder people to put themselves out of a job?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing. I think I've been asked this before. Common sense, I think, will reign. And ultimately, I think there's ways that we can do this to phase it in, where you say, hey, listen, grandfather in the current ones, and over time we can do it. But ultimately, we need to look at changing, reforming city government, because it's not delivering enough for Chicagoans right now. So I think those are ideas that we have, and we have plenty more that'll improve lives of the city.
The city's most recent forecast projects a $1.16 billion budget gap next year. You've said that a property tax increase should be off the table. How would you tackle that deficit?
Yeah, I think if you look at, I would back up and look at our budget process how it is right now, and I think we have a fundamentally broken process to address our budget. And you look at last year, we had a lot of information that wasn't being shared across city council. So the mayor had access to a report, then he didn't release it to city council, then he redacted and released it. So I think the first thing is we need to have a collaborative process with our budget. We can't get into a situation where the mayor and city council have competing budgets every year. That's not productive, and it doesn't improve lives for Chicagoans. So I think we would look at, how do we first find savings? We look at procurement, we look at unused office space, we look at different things where we can find immediate savings in this budget, but do it in a collaborative way. Do it in partnership with city council instead of against them.
Do you think that, that's a significant budget, gap to come up with, just from sort of efficiency, savings, cuts? Are there additional, revenue streams? Are there other things you'd like to see, happen there?
Yeah, I think we need to start focusing on growth. So I think I like the phrase cheap and cheerful. So there's a lot of things we can do that are cheap and cheerful to bring more revenue to the city. I like the idea of making Chicago the small business capital of the world. I think we have 100,000 small businesses in the city that employ about 60% of our workforce. I want to make it easier to start, expand, and grow a small business here. And I think when you do that, you get large employers that are going to want to relocate here. You're going to get large employers who want to expand here. So that's one idea in terms of growing. The other idea is we want to reimagine the Loop. The Loop has forever been a place that's just designed for office workers. I want to see more tourists there. I want to see more Chicagoans spending time there. We've got a lot of ideas about how to do that. And that's a virtuous cycle. If you get people spending time downtown, spending tax dollars, or spending money that ultimately generates revenue for us, there are things we can do to start growing.
Some candidates and elected officials are calling for the city to, buy back the parking meters as a source of revenue. Where do you stand on that issue?
I think we need to look at what the return is on that. I think Alderman Irvin actually had a pretty interesting idea recently on this about potentially using the pension funds as sort of assets to back and acquire those back. But ultimately, you need to look at what is the best deal for taxpayers, and does it make sense for us? I would really take a good hard look at that. I don't have a lot of faith in this current mayor, to be honest with you, to make a great deal there. But I think the council, and I think hopefully others, can make sure that we make a firm deal that is in taxpayers' best interest.
Your public safety platform includes a call to bring back the ShotSpotter gunshot detection system. There's a recent analysis from New Chicago that actually found officers responded to 911 calls in a dozen South and West Side neighborhoods 4 minutes faster after ShotSpotter went offline. Why do you think it's something the city needs?
Well, that study, I think, was completely flawed. It compared cold weather months with warm weather months when there's typically more crime. It didn't include actual gunshots in that shootings in that analysis. There was other things where it was just totally apples and oranges and made to look at the way it was. I think ultimately ShotSpotter and other technology should get resources to people who need them when they need them. And if you look at ShotSpotter, it's ultimately about, if there's a gunshot in this city, we want officers to get there to be able to respond to that. And that's ultimately what it's about. We had an incident this Saturday where, it was 40 minutes from the time of a gunshot to the time of a responding officer. And I think that's just not appropriate in the city.
You've also called for improving safety on the CTA. According to recent Chicago police data, serious crime on the system is down and there is an expanding security presence. Are current efforts not going far enough?
I think we're heading in the right direction. I think when the sheriff is spending more time on the CTA, that's fantastic. I think we're seeing a more focus on that because ultimately the CTA is a tremendous tool for affordability. If the CTA is a way for lots of people to get around our city, to see friends, to get to work, to all these things. And I think the next step is fare evasion gates. So if you look at fare evasion gates and what's happened in San Francisco, they've really done a great job driving down incidents, driving down cleaning hours, and actually increasing revenue. So I think fare evasion gates, we would absolutely push to pilot those out.
You've also advocated for universal child care
Yep.
for Chicagoans. How would you fund that program?
Great question. Child care is one of those things. I have 2 young kids. Child care is a huge expense for us. I think through savings and other things we can find pilot money for that. But just because we want to fund new programs doesn't mean we can't find the money elsewhere. We have to do it. We can't have this mindset of we can't do anything new. We have to have the approach that we need to find the savings to fund new programs. So I think that's a good one to start with.
You've also called for taking another look at the Safety Act, particularly the pretrial release system. State lawmakers have had some discussions about those. So far, no significant progress toward amending the law. How would you try to work with, the governor and legislators to make those changes, coming in fresh to Springfield without prior relationships?
Well, I think it's all about collaboration. It's across the board. I think if you look at not only with Springfield, but with council, the mayor's office has totally changed from 10, 20, 50 years. It used to be a rubber stamp. The dailies would come in and council would do what they say, or Springfield would do what they say. The time has changed. I think it's time for a collaborative leader, someone who can come in and build relationships and can do that. I've got a lot of experience. I've spent my career doing that. So I think having relationships and investing in Springfield, investing with council, I think would go a long way these days.
Yeah, we've got a little under a minute left, but you mentioned, some of the fraught relationship between Mayor Johnson, members of the City Council. What work do you think needs to be done to repair those relationships?
I think we need to refocus ourselves away from ideology and on execution, on getting things done for Chicagoans, on getting, improving lives. Right now, there's so much talk about ideology and this and that. What's actually going to improve someone's lives? How do you get enough people together in a coalition to affect an outcome? And that's really what I'd be focused on.
All right, Chicago mayoral candidate Liam Stanton, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And additional candidates running for mayor have also been joining us on Chicago Tonight. You can visit our website to find those interviews at WTTW.com/mayor2027. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. You can stream Chicago Tonight on our WTTW YouTube channel every evening and catch up on any programs you may have missed. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. We leave you tonight with more from that beluga whale rescue that the Shed Aquarium was part of. This is the important stuff, folks. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that contributes to public safety policy and guidelines.